Welcome to Liz McMullen Show. I have a returning guest, Carsen Taite. I can't believe you came back on the show again. My goodness.
Did I have a choice?
I cornered you electronically and asked you to come back.
Like I would ever say no to you. No, I'm very happy to be here.
So, before we launch into the reasonable doubt kind of stuff, I want to talk a little bit about romantic suspense intrigue. And what I was actually paying attention to that when I was reading your book, trying to see, like, I could see where things got juicy, as in we have these two professional women, serious jobs, and stepping away from serious jobs. But there's still, you have enough so that it's almost like hazing in and out of it. Like you have enough sexy stuff for, intriguing, attraction kind of stuff. And then coming back into the serious again. And I know it's probably just not the way you write, but it was something that I noticed. I'm like, oh, this she's hot and she's hot too. Oh yeah. And then real life. Do you
hot in real life? It happened.
Yes, real life. Well, yeah, I have issues. I feel that fiction is just as real as anything else could possibly be. So when you write a story, do you consciously think about how you're weaving in so that it's not a full-on just romance, that it's romantic suspense intrigue? Like, is there some craftsmanship that goes into there?
Yeah, and it may not be on the front end. My way of going about it is pretty much to do plot first. And so I don't plot it out ahead of time, but I write with a story in mind, the story arc of the intrigue in mind. And then the romance kind of weaves in and out. And I look for opportunities as I'm writing to weave that in. The most challenging aspect, I think, is the conflict, the various conflicts. And I think that's the hardest thing about writing romantic suspense is you've got to keep your characters together enough to get people interested in their relationship. But usually the intrigue is the part, in my books anyway, that's forcing them apart. And so it's, that dance of keeping them together, but keeping them apart, but keeping them back together.
And do-si-do.
Exactly. And, in this particular book, you've got someone who's investigating someone else. I mean, realistically, they're not going to fall into bed together right away. It just doesn't make sense.
Oh, darn.
I know. So you've got to figure out a way to keep the reader interested in the romance, even though they can't be together for a while.
I like that they annoyed each other from the start. Which I it's so funny. I off camera, off radio. I edit all of the educational videos for GCLS, and that includes the Writing Academy videos. And you did one on romantic suspense intrigue, and Georgia Beers did one on romance. I know, shock, that the two of you would represent these categories. But I get to kind of see the rhythm and the difference between the genres and what makes them unique. And I have to say, like I was trying to say, there's an artistry and a tempo, because you're going to have the tension between the two characters that you want to be viable enough to keep on while other things are going on, like the actual suspense part, in this case, bombings and terrorism and being at odds with each other. Like, that's a different kind of counterpoint. Like, we got to keep those two tension aspects going. Do you edit more into that? Like, once you have a draft done, you go in and kind of try and find the best blend of, keeping both plots and subplots going?
Yeah, a lot of that comes in the editing phase, because you can go back and then see where I just kind of push through a first draft. I don't spend a lot of time thinking, I don't spend a lot of time thinking in my head, because I don't write well in my head. I write well once it's on the paper, so paper is such an archaic term. Once it's in the computer,
you can say paper. You can say
once
paper.
It's out of my head, then I can see it, and then I can work with it, and then I can figure out where do I need to find those touch points, you know, where the two characters I need to bring them together more, or where, you know, or break them up. But it's hard for me to see that in my head ahead of time. So I'll just push through a first draft. And usually what I have there at the end of it is a good intrigue plot. And then I have places where I've worked things in with the characters, and then I can go back and beef that up. But a lot of that's on the back end.
And for those of you who don't know, Carsen has a nefarious past as a lawyer, which I find, you know, fascinating, counterintuitive, not counterintuitive. You could have your hard drive is wired for organization, probably to a point where panstring for you is different than panstring for somebody else.
Well, you know, you would think that, but not with the kind of law I practiced. I mean, I was a criminal defense lawyer, and, you know, it's very different, without getting too into it, but it's very different than a lot of other kinds of law. You know, in civil litigation, the sides take depositions, they exchange discovery, they do all this stuff. So by the time they get to trial, everybody knows what everybody's going to say. There's no aha moments, you know, no Perry Mason moments in trial.
Dun, dun. Law and order.
But a criminal defense lawyer will, you may not know what I have actually had this happen in a federal trial where the government calls a witness. We had their name. Say the guy's name is Joe Smith. And we had asked our client, who's Joe Smith? I don't know. You know, we had our investigator look for Joe Smith. You know, nobody knows who Joe Smith is. They call Joe Smith. He walks in the courtroom, and our client's like, oh, that's Joe Smith. We're like, oh. And you literally have like 5 minutes to scramble and figure out, you know, what's going on.
You're like, oh, fuck.
So there's lots of panstring.
I totally see that. I mean, like on a micro level, when I was in college, I was on the debate society, and I actually I did better on the fly than I did if I was supposed to organize things. Like my poor debate partner, we'd get like a case statement, and then we'd have to come up with something in about 15 minutes, and I'd sit down and I just blather on and say things, and then she would structure it for me. She'd structure the argument for me, and I'd just go up like an actress and say the shit that she organized for me.
Well, I can't tell you how many times, you know, that in state court, in Texas anyway, you know, call your witness. I'm done. Don't have any more witnesses. You know, does everybody rest? Yes, everybody rests. Okay, begin your closing argument. Like right now. There's no, you know, hey, let's go put together our notes. You got to stand up and just summarize that stuff. So you kind of learn to think on the fly.
Oh my God, that is so funny. So it is completely in line with your skill set to be a panster, but
yeah.
but you have a lot of experience at it. How many books have you written at this point that are in print already?
Reasonable Doubt, which came out in September, is my 13th novel.
So do you feel, and I know do you feel that you've hit your stride in a certain way? Because I can see the difference in your writing myself, because I have, back in the day when I had time to read the entire body of work of an author before I had them on the show, back when things were like moonbeams and butterflies and unicorns. But I can see the change, and I really feel like you've got this going on. And usually, sometimes with series, this is not a series, the book that we're talking about, usually with series, sometimes things peter out after a few books. And I felt like Switchblade was the best in the series. And it was, what was it, the third one? Or
it was the third one. And you noticed I ended there.
You're like, end scene.
End scene. I mean, I do think that's the key to a series, to go out on a high note. Although I have done other Luca Bennett stories. I actually have one coming out in April, a novella.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I do feel like in a way I've hit my stride in that there are certain things that are easier for me, like knowing I have a better sense of the arc of the story as I'm going than I used to. But I just turned in a novel and it was extremely frustrating. I think it's going to be good. It's the second book in the Lone Star Law series. I just turned in the manuscript, but it was very difficult for me to write because I was struggling with point of view issues. So there's still, you challenge yourself to do different things, and you, I think if things get too easy, then you're not challenging yourself enough. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I read a lot of stuff and for my show and for myself. And there are some times when I have to, I've gotten very impatient. And I want things to get started early. I want it to have a good momentum, and I want it to make me want to read it, like the whole thing, And I find myself immediately tugged into your stories, and I don't know if it's like I like the way your brain works, which probably because you and I couldn't stop talking in my pre-interview conversation. But I was like, yay, whee! Like I'm reading through your book and it just keeps me going rather than me like, Liz, you have a responsibility here. You have a responsibility here.
Well, I appreciate that, and thank you very much. When I read a book, I want it to get going. I mean, I want to get to the meat of the story. I don't want a lot of background. I want to dive into a story, and I like action and stuff.
And so you've chosen a very sedate genre for that reason. Well, because I love non sequiturs and bad segues, I am going to ask you to read from your most recent published work.
Okay.
Let's just turn on a dime and go someplace completely different. Can you read to me?
All right, well, then I will. So I'm going to read from chapter 1. This is a short scene. It's in one of the main characters' point of view. Her name is Sarah Flores. If you've read my book, Rush, you will have met Sarah Flores. She was a secondary character in that book. She was an FBI profiler. And this book kind of doesn't require a lot of setup. I'll just go ahead and dive right in.
Yeah, go for it.
Sarah Flores ducked as the bullet barreled past her head and into the wall behind her. She cast a quick look at the body on the bed and decided she could do more good chasing the suspect. She ran out into the hall and paused at the top of the stairs, listening for footfalls. Was he hiding on the landing, or had he ducked into one of the other bedrooms on the floor? Seconds later, she heard a crash outside and dashed down the stairs and out the door. Her boss, Trip Sandler, met her on the front steps. I lost him, Sarah pointed up to the second-story balcony. He must have jumped. Come on. Tripp placed a hand on her arm. Slow down. Mendez and Davis took off after him. We need to stay here and secure the scene. He was right, but Sarah chafed at the order to stand down. It was against her instinct to stay behind, but she dutifully led her boss up the stairs and into the bedroom where she'd found the Atlanta Strangler's latest victim. The kill was too fresh to smell, but the woman on the bed was clearly dead. Tripp pulled on a pair of gloves as he circled the bed. Is this the 6th or the 7th? I've lost count. Sarah looked up from the body. When you start losing track, it might be time to call it a day. Why should I keep count when I've got you to do it for me? He struck his forehead with a gloved hand. Oh, wait. I only have you till the end of the day. Who's going to keep track of all the dead bodies when you're gone? Sarah shook her head, but she didn't bother replying. Tripp had been bellyaching about her upcoming transfer for weeks. He'd gone from cajoling at first in an attempt to get her to stay to his present mode of inserting guilt-tripping remarks into every conversation. It didn't matter. He could do whatever he wanted. Tomorrow she'd be back in D.C. packing up her apartment, and the day after that she'd be on a plane to Dallas in a new job that didn't involve body counts. She'd spent her entire career as an agent in the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit investigating serial killers and witnessing the rituals of their carnage. She was ready for a routine of paper pushing, which was exactly what her new position in the fraud unit would entail. She was almost done examining the body when another one of their team members, Peter Buckner, walked into the room. She could tell by his expression he didn't have good news, but she asked anyway. Did they get him? Nope. They barely even caught a glance before he vanished. We've got Atlanta PD on it, and we've sent notifications to the airport, bus, and train stations, but we don't have much in the way of a description. I didn't get much of a look at him either, Sarah said, but he won't leave town. He's escalating. She pointed at the body. Look at these marks here. He did this while she was still alive. He's taking more risks, getting more juiced by the killing. No way would he take this show on the road when he's just hit his stride here where he's most comfortable. Being chased today probably just amped up his adrenaline. Tripp leaned over her shoulder as she took pictures of the cuts, still clotted with blood that formed a heart shape on the woman's chest. The cuts were deeper, more jagged than the ones on the previous victims. She's right, Peter. Get a Baker from Atlanta PD on the phone. I want a meeting with their folks first thing in the morning. We need to give them an updated profile and talk new strategy. Sarah looked up to see Tripp looking at her. She'd worked with him long enough to know exactly what he was thinking. She shook her head. No way. Come on, Tripp said. We'll get your flight rescheduled. Just a few more days. Right. It's always just a few more days. And what if another call comes in? A few more days after that? She shook her head. They're expecting me in Dallas. Right. All those paper pushers just sitting around with files full of bank statements for you to dig into. Sarah laughed. The fraud unit at FBI Dallas would probably have a thing or two to say about Tripp's characterization of their work, but the lack of excitement was exactly what she was looking for. The past 6 years as a special agent in the BAU had taken its toll on every aspect of her life. Her sleep, her mental health, and definitely her social life. She had a hard time keeping up with any kind of relationship when she had to fly out of town at a moment's notice, and most of what she saw on the job wasn't suitable dinner conversation. Tripp and some of the others had been doing the job for a lot longer, but she'd watched everything about their personal lives fade until they were nothing without the work. She still had time to make a new life for herself, and the transfer to Dallas was what she needed to resist being defined by the evil she encountered on a daily basis. Just because there's no blood involved doesn't mean the job isn't fulfilling, she said. Sure, I guess there's always the risk of a paper cut to make things interesting. Whatever. She shrugged off his teasing. He only did it because he was going to miss her. She was going to miss him too, along with the rest of the team. They'd been her family for the past 6 years, but it was time to find a new family, one bound together by something besides murder. So that's the first thing.
It's subtle. It's very low key.
Dead bodies and all.
Whizzing bullets. Escalating violence.
Well, I mean, I was trying to show what she's leaving behind.
Well, it's kind of like with both her and Ellery, it's like the mafia. Just when you think you're gone, they pull you right back in.
They pull you back.
Although I think Ellery has chosen a much funner thing to engage in.
She repurposes furniture.
And I love the different shows that do that on. I love them. I can't help it.
Hey, I do too. I wish I could do all that.
You know what? What's interesting is there's a logical connection. I never really have those. For the longest, I was always watching either true crime shows or fictional crime shows. And then I got to this point where I'm like, you know what? I'm sick of watching people's lives fall apart and, people dying and awful things happening. I'd like to see things being created. So I watched the DIY channel. I watch all these, do-it-yourself kind of things, and I'm not handy at all. But one of the things that I like about it is it's all about, reclaiming something, making something right, fixing it. They even have shows, that are specifically, there are 2 of them that are specifically about contractors going in and fixing things that had been horribly done by previous contractors. And I liked the creative quality. And that's what I enjoy in it. And that's why I try and conduct the things that I do in my life in the same way, in a very creative, supportive way of living rather than, an adversarial kind of thing.
Well, yeah, and that's exactly what this other character, Ellery, she's looking for something that fulfills a different part of her. I mean, her work has always been about solving people's problems, but nobody ever comes to her that's happy and, in a good place. She was a lawyer. They always came to her when their lives were crumbling or someone else's life was crumbling. And so her new occupation is just a way to A, be creative, and B,
I'm digging it. Like I actually really like that about her, that, instead of having her cell phone like welded to her hand, she would, leave it behind. She'd lose sense of time. She just like get in the zone. And I thought that was really rad to go from something that was very engaging intellectually, but not so much physically, to something that is both in tandem creative and intellectual and enjoyable. And I was like, oh, I like this change. I like this choice. Whereas the other one, I mean, not that it's not a good choice to try and find a place within an organization that doesn't require you to be in full alert 24/7. But it seemed as not as an awesome choice as what Ellery did.
No, I mean, Sarah's choice was more about finding a 9 to 5, more of, and hers was more about staying in the agency because she couldn't imagine leaving the agency, but finding a place within it where she could also have a life of her own.
And of course, you go and ruin it for her, Carsen.
I know. I ruined it for both of them, didn't I? And
you are a terrible, awful person, but I dig you.
These two nice women and just
fuck with their world. But at least you kind of, will forgive you for actually, one of their goals for both of them wanting a different life was to have a spouse, to have time for some interaction that wasn't a one-night stand or superficial, because there was no time to do anything other than that. And at least you give them that success eventually.
Eventually, yes. In the final pages.
Thanks for the suspense, intrigue with a dash of romance. Bad Carsen.
So which character did you like best?
Ellery.
Yeah.
Obviously, since and it's biased because it's just intellectually what I find more exciting. And obviously for the connection between how I've changed my viewing habits, and I think it's also affected my writing as well. It's a different zone than it would be. Although I'm in the middle of writing a romance and I'm stuck. It's so funny. I'm like, oh my God, where are my demons and witches and ghosts? What am I going to do in this traditional romance? I'm stuck.
Traditional romance is hard, I think.
Yeah, I mean, like I have the two personalities. I have them. I know the traditional arc and whatnot, but I tried to be a pantser, Carsen, and it didn't work out. And I have like these binders that from when I originally wrote it in 2008, with character things and all this kind of. It was so funny. I psyched myself out by having all this great planning, and I didn't think I'd be able to deliver and do honor to what I had done. So last year I failed at NaNoWriMo. I flagged out, and I was like, okay, you flagged out because you didn't think that you'd be able to do justice to all of your plannering. Well, why don't you try and be a pantser? And that went really well for 25,000 words.
Well, I mean, first of all, don't ever say you failed at NaNoWriMo. Because I think, my second book was, I wrote like 25,000 words of it during NaNoWriMo. I didn't win, quote unquote, but it's my most successful book. And
which is?
It Should Be a Crime. And it still sells really well. It just resonates with people, I guess. And I don't think I would have gotten the jump start on it that I would have had I not challenged myself to do that month of writing.
So. Yeah, I know I'll get back into it. I've been doing a lot of online classes relating to other work that I want to do. It's just like graphic design and digital editing, and I find it really fulfilling and fun and jazzy. So it's not like I'm totally procrastinating, but I totally put the book down. I'll pick it up again. I keep on talking myself into it. I'll do it tomorrow or the other day. I'll be all Scarlett O'Hara about it.
Well, I wrote 2 years ago. I wrote Courtship. I wrote 50,000 words of my novel Courtship during NaNoWriMo. And then in December, I untangled it. I just had to spend a whole month untangling it. If I'd just gone a little slower. I mean, I wound up writing something. I read a whole plot piece that I decided didn't work anymore.
Well, yeah, I mean, like, I know I'll get back into it, but I also, it's like my pop, like, has all these, he was a very, man of few words, but his words that he did say were always really useful. And one of the things he always says, and whenever I've broken this rule, it hasn't worked out for me, so I should listen. Don't force anything.
It's true.
Whatever. I mean, the most vivid thing happened when I was in my tween stage. I can't remember exactly how old I was. But in the bathroom, it was, old school shower with the the hands with the knobs. I mean, like the four tines, and the water on the hot side wouldn't turn off. So I got a set of pliers and proceeded to break one of the tines.
Don't force anything.
It's like, don't force anything. And I was just like, oh my God, I ruined something unreplaceable in a brownstone that's never going to be the same again. Bad Lizzie. Anyway, so do you have, like, what's in the pike for you? Like, what books are coming up next?
A bunch of stuff. So this spring I will have a novella in a 3-novella book called Girls with Guns. Allie Valley has a story in it. Michelle Grubb, who's a fairly new Bold Strokes author, has a story in it, and I have a story. It's a Luca Bennett story, and my story takes place right after Switchblade. Like Switchblade ends right around Christmas. It'll pick up in February, right after that story ends. I left a bad person on the loose, and then I'm going to resolve what happens with that in this story. And then in June, I will have the second book in the Lone Star Law series, Above the Law, will be out. And then I'm working on my fall release for 2016 right now. And I'm really excited about it. It's a book called Without Justice. One of the main characters is in witness protection. And she used to be a lawyer, but she's not anymore because she's been given a new job. And she's in a small Texas town. She starts dating the newly elected district attorney, who's a kind of a young powerhouse. And there's a murder that happens, and someone's getting prosecuted for it. And my former lawyer kind of realizes that person is not getting good representation. Mm-hmm. And she thinks she may know who did the murder. And so that puts her kind of at odds with her DA girlfriend. And and it also, causes her to assess whether or not she should risk her own identity to help someone get justice. So there you go.
So there you go. Well,
I've got a few more books signed after that, but they're still kind of in the hatching phase. I've got 3 more books on board for 2017.
Damn. So you're making me tired, Carsen.
I'm making myself tired.
Carsen, thank you so much for muscling through another dry episode with me. We'll just end it on a laughter. That's good.
There you go.